SCRA, the South Carolina Research Authority. Also on the line, we have Paul Dudley. Paul, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Christine. Good afternoon, everybody. And my name is Paul Dudley, and I'm the program manager working for Christine. Look forward to working with all of you guys as we move forward on this RFA. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. I do want to make everyone aware that we are recording this call because there were quite a few people who were interested in participating, but the timing did not work for them. So by recording this, we will make it publicly available so that other people can also hear that we're not able to participate today. Unfortunately, we're not going to have time for introductions today because we do have currently more than 20 participants, but we actually have close to 40 that are registered to participate. So I apologize, we're not going to be able to give the floor to everyone for proper introduction. I do also ask that the participants hold their questions until the end. If you would like, you can submit your questions through the chat feature of GoToMeeting, and Paul will log those questions and bring them up when we get to the question and answer period at the end of the session. I do also ask if any of you are traveling or might be in a noisy environment, if you would please kindly mute your phone. And so with that, I am going to kick this off. I appreciate everyone's interest today in the request for applications from SCRA, and would like to walk you through the agenda briefly here. I want to start off by providing a background on SCRA, as some of you may not have previously engaged with us, and there may be other opportunities outside of the academic programs group that could be of interest or relevant to your operations. I'll also then provide an overview of the academic programs group, as well as our lead initiative, the collaboration centers. And then from there, I'm going to shift gears and focus on the RFA, because I know that's what's of most immediate interest to all of you, but I want to provide you the appropriate background so that going into your application, you understand the perspective that SCRA will be coming from, as well as the reviewers that will be looking at the application. And then I'll turn over the floor to you all for questions. Again, as I mentioned, please submit your questions through the chat if you would like, or you can hold them until the question and answer period. I'd like to start off with a background on SCRA, or the South Carolina Research Authority. We are a group that was formed by an act of the South Carolina legislature in 1983 to grow the knowledge economy in South Carolina. At that point in time, milling jobs, for example, were being offshored by the handful, and the legislature recognized something needed to be done to stem the tide and reinvigorate the economy of South Carolina. And with that, SCRA was born. The state provided $500,000 of funding and 1,400 acres of land when the organization was established in 1983. I will tell you that the 1,400 acres of land certainly ended up being much more valuable than the $500,000 in funding that we received. That was the only direct funding that SCRA has received from the state, however. And so over the years, SCRA has been working on opportunities to keep the enterprise self-sustaining. And with that, in the late 90s, they formed a group called ATI, or Advanced Technologies International. Some of you may be familiar with them because ATI builds out consortia between academia and industry to deliver on very specific DoD contracts. Then further along in 2005 and 2006, there were two additional pieces of legislation enacted that pertain to SCRA. One of them required the establishment of innovation centers. And these innovation centers are mandated to be tied to each of the research universities within the state. So I'm currently sitting in the Charleston Innovation Center, which is tied to MUSC. There's also one in Columbia on Assembly Street, and then another in Anderson, South Carolina, tied to Clemson University. And these innovation centers have space and wet labs available not just to academic researchers, but also to entrepreneurs operating in the areas of interest to SCRA. Then the other component, the other piece of legislation, formed SC Launch. And SC Launch I'll speak to later on the next slide, because that is the entrepreneurial programs piece of SCRA. And it may be relevant for some of you who are joining us on the call today. As ATI moved forward, it became quite successful. Last year, they had $500 million in revenue alone. And as you can imagine, that tends to draw the attraction and attention for an organization away from our granting opportunities and some of our other missions with regards to helping entrepreneurs and academia. So with that, in January of 2017, ATI was sold to a group called Answer in Virginia. And with that, we did have as a condition of the sale that the 165 employees in Somerville that are associated with ATI remain within the state. So with that, we are now completely separated from ATI. And with that separation, it allowed SCRA to revisit and refocus on its original mission. And so with that, it is to foster the innovation economy in South Carolina. And we effectuate that through 4 different operating divisions. So I, as the Director of Academic Programs, will speak later on with regards to our initiatives and how they may be relevant to you. But we also have an industry programs group who is charged with attracting R&D jobs into the state and also making connections between existing industry within South Carolina and academia and entrepreneurial endeavors, really as a network to address unmet needs within industry. Then we also have the facilities division. As I mentioned, that's the group that operates the 3 different innovation centers. And then we also have the entrepreneurial programs group, which is known as SC Launch. And that is what most people have historically affiliated with SCRA. So SC Launch provides mentoring as well as access to resource partners for startups. So legal, accounting, HR, any type of auxiliary function that a startup typically doesn't have on its payroll but needs access to. And then also provides funding. So across all of the different funding mechanisms within SCRA, a South Carolina-based startup can receive up to $750,000 in funding. Now, some of that comes from the industry program side and grants that are managed there. The academic programs group also manages 2 grant functions, the SBIR and STTR matching grant, as well as the academic startup assistance program, which is a $25,000 grant to act as seed funding to help generate preliminary data for university-based intellectual property. And then it all leads ultimately to investments by SC Launch. So SC Launch can invest and actually be an equity holder in South Carolina-based enterprises and can invest up to 3 times, up to $200,000 per time. So that's how we get to the $750,000 in funding for startups in that space. I do also want to mention across these 4 different divisions of SCRA, we're focused in 3 different industry verticals. So life sciences, information technology, and advanced materials and manufacturing. So within the academic programs group, when SCRA reorganized about 18 months ago, it also began working with the academic partners to align SCRA's capabilities and bandwidth with the needs of academia to assist in a meaningful fashion. And so with that, that culminated in a collaboration agreement called the Strategic Collaboration Agreement that was signed by the research universities and SCRA in December of 16. Under that collaboration agreement, the universities highlighted 3 particular areas where they want SCRA to assist. One of those is augmenting support for university-affiliated startups. Some of those efforts are being handled through SC Launch. Another effort on that front is to move the Academic Startup Assistance Program and the SBIR, STTR matching grants into academic programs so that there is a closer tie-in to the institutions. Then the second request of academia was to invest in research infrastructure and financially support collaborative research. So this collaborative research piece, as well as the infrastructure, ties into the mission currently with these collaboration centers and the current RFA. Then the final request addresses grant services. So working across institutions to build consortia that can submit more competitive grant applications. And so with that, I do need to explain to you the hierarchy and the governance of the academic programs group, because this all influences ultimately how the decisions are made with regards to the RFA. The SCRA Executive Committee, which is a 9-member committee and has the presidents of each of the research universities, as well as the president of Francis Marion University on it, determined that the best way to enact the items that were covered under the collaboration agreement was to build a committee called the SACP. Now, I may inundate you throughout this talk with a lot of acronyms, but the one I beg you to remember is the SACT because it's going to come back multiple times in this conversation. So the SACT stands for the SCRA Academia Collaboration Team, and it's a 7-member committee. There are appointees from the presidents of each of the research universities, an appointee representing the primarily undergraduate institutions, one appointee representing the technical colleges, one industry representative, and then a representative from SCRA. And this team was built to design and implement programs to deliver under the collaboration agreement. So with that, the first half of last year, the group worked to evaluate the research focus and areas of strategic interest for the academic institutions across the state. And at this point, I should highlight, when I keep mentioning academic institutions, our focus is exclusively on the public institutions because we are a state-affiliated organization, and we are here to assist with the other state-affiliated organizations. And so with that, when we looked at and did an assessment of the areas of research focus, we identified 9 different areas where there was connectivity across multiple institutions within the state. And then the SACT prioritized those 9 different potential areas, and the top 3 areas are advancing currently through a feasibility assessment process. So those 3 areas are what you see highlighted in the RFA: composites development and testing through an industry solution center, medical devices, and then technology-enabled population health. So the members of the SACT are high-level administrators. We have VPRs, heads of the economic development groups, a variety of representatives, and they recognize that if we really want to ascertain if we can build something of interest that will be viable long-term in these areas of research, we need to bring in the subject matter experts. And so with that, if you look down here under advanced manufacturing and materials and life sciences biotechnology, we have these feasibility assessment teams. And some of you on the call today have served in a capacity on the feasibility assessment team. I appreciate your time and thank you for your service on that front. This feasibility assessment is a 6-month-long process that we kicked off in October of last year, and it involves benchmarking, creating asset mapping, not just of physical assets, but also expertise across the state and intellectual property, and also surveying industry within the state. And then our next steps are to look at how we're going to fund these potential research centers, because there is not enough funding within the academic program's budget to support any one of these centers independently. We have to leverage it towards follow-on funding. And so with that, thank you all who have served on that front. So stepping back, I was talking about these different research areas that the SACT identified, and they're labeling those as collaboration centers. And the mission behind that is to really take advantage of and capitalize on the expertise and research infrastructure we have across the state so that we can lead it into having an economic impact. So where this concept is a little bit different than a traditional academic research center is that indeed through working with SCRA to stay on mission, we had to develop these criteria. And these criteria are important going into the RFA as well. Although they're not captured in the RFA, it is certainly the overarching mission of these collaboration centers, so you'll want to keep these in mind. These are, as I mentioned, quite different from a typical academic research center in that we're looking for economic impact. And so with that, we're looking exclusively at industries with a growing market, with a validated need that we can draw on resources across the state to develop. And we also have to be able to identify how we're going to stand up these centers long term. And as we went through the feasibility assessment process and the asset mapping, we also then culminated into a SWOT analysis. And with that, we needed to be certain, as we identified gaps in our infrastructure as well as our expertise, that it was something we could address. Either we have the funds within SCRA to address it, or we could identify external sources to help fill those gaps. And then finally, looking at job creation, startup creation, and workforce development. These are all elements that come into play with regards to the proposals we're going to receive under this RFA. And so with that, I'll transition now to the concept behind the Medical Devices Collaboration Center. Originally, the concept for this was to build out a network to enable the extraction of clinical needs from clinicians across the state, and then build a network between those clinicians and engineers who have the capability to develop solutions to the unmet needs. As we went through the feasibility assessment process, though, it became resoundingly clear that there was a much more fundamental issue that needed to be addressed before that network could be built out. And that has to do with some of the challenges that are faced within technology transfer within the state as it pertains to medical device development. So in working with the feasibility assessment team, They requested that we involve the tech transfer offices, and ultimately the initial purpose is to provide services to the technology transfer offices. And so with that, we would be establishing an advisory panel called the Medical Device Commercialization Advisory Panel, the MDCAP, that will provide insight from industry as well as into some of the areas that technology transfer offices don't have the bandwidth or the capability to address, such as reimbursement and regulatory affairs. And so with that, we will be looking to build out this advisory panel under this RFA and then run several test cases through it to validate that this system will work and it will provide meaningful feedback to the tech transfer offices. So with that, you can see the different center functions providing this diligence support. So we're going to put together entire product profiles for the applications that we receive, as well as making connections for students along the way. And then ultimately, yes, we want to build out a nexus of medical device expertise within the state. I do want to touch on, I'm saying we're providing these services to the tech transfer offices. They are a key stakeholder in this particular collaboration center because we are providing this to augment their capabilities. It's certainly not a substitute for working with your tech transfer office. This is also not an accelerator or an incubator. This is instead a system and a network that we're building out. And we are in no way trying to tread on existing processes within institutions or replace any of that. So you certainly still would want to work with your tech transfer office and be compliant with your intellectual property policy. Looking at the inclusion criteria, I do want to touch on the fact there is not a focus for this medical device area. We are not looking at a specific indication. We're not looking at a specific type of regulatory pathway. Certainly, we're going to be able to fund and advance technologies more readily that have a lower regulatory threshold, but nonetheless, we really do want to properly vet technologies as they come into the tech transfer offices. And then we're also looking to ultimately build out that network that I mentioned as the original vision for this center, in that we would be connecting clinicians with engineers across institutions to develop and accelerate the development of solutions for unmet medical needs. And with that, we also have a fabulous opportunity to engage with the technical colleges across the state, as quite a few of them have advanced machining capabilities as well as additive manufacturing capabilities. And so we will certainly be working with those organizations when we get to the point where prototyping may be generated. And so with that, I just want to touch on the scope of the RFA. As I mentioned, we have this system. We're going to be building out an advisory panel. We want to be building out product profiles through the advisory panel. And so we're going to be accepting 3 to 4 applications and building out the product profiles for each application that we receive. And then the MDCAP will provide a recommendation to the SACT with regards to which of those applications should receive funding under the SACT, under this RFA, to advance the technology itself. So some of the funds will be going towards building out the product profile, and then some of the bulk of the funds will be going towards technology advancement. I would like to touch on the eligibility criteria because this is really a key thing for everyone to keep in mind. I know we have a lot of participants on the call right now that are not affiliated with academic institutions. Some of you would be exceptional participants potentially on the advisory panel. So if you're interested in that, please contact me offline and we can discuss how we could move forward on that front. But with regards to submissions, since this is an academic programs funding initiative, the applications have to come from academia. And in this particular collaboration center, the applications are coming from the technology transfer offices. So each technology transfer office is selecting one device to put forward as an application, and each of those will then receive a full product profile built out as part of this system. Then looking at the institutions that do not have a tech transfer office, we certainly have the door open to them as well. Please contact Paul. His contact information is here on this slide and it's throughout the RFA. Please contact him if you do not have a tech transfer office, and SCRA will support you in pulling together the application. And with this, we do encourage applications that involve technologies that have joint intellectual property from multiple institutions. That's certainly fine, but we do require that the intellectual property be managed by the academic institution. So this would not be a mechanism for advancing a technology that did not come out of academia. With that, I'm going to cover the review criteria. There are two different sets of review criteria, and they're being reviewed by different people. So under the technical criteria, part of the process here with regards to feasibility and validation that we're looking to accomplish is building out this advisory panel and determining what inputs would be useful to provide back to the tech transfer offices. And so with that, we are going to be looking to the inaugural advisory panel to establish the criteria for evaluating these different devices. So I do not have explicit instructions for you all on that, other than it will all be related to the commercially relevant metrics. So looking at the regulatory path, looking at production and feasibility of production, as well as the reimbursement environment. Then the strategic criteria, and I will speak on the next slide about the actual process that everything goes through. But looking at the strategic criteria, these are elements that are defined by the SACT. And so the SACT is going to take the recommendation from the advisory panel into mind, but then also review the applications in light of these strategic criteria before they make a funding decision. And so with that, there is a benefit of, under your submission, working with a primarily undergraduate institution or a technical college. It's not mandatory, but there's a benefit for that. There's also an additional benefit if you're establishing a new relationship between academia and industry as part of this. And so we will be adding to the submission portal the ability to input industry letters of support for what the product that you're proposing. Then we're also looking for devices that are going to have a validated market and very clear pathway to market. We also have the economic development components in there, so the potential, for example, producing the device within the state and creating a startup or creating manufacturing jobs, as well as bringing in that workforce development component. And then, as I've mentioned, follow-on funding is paramount for all of this. We need to understand what the next steps are for funding for each of these applications. Then we're also looking for a commitment from the institution that's submitting. So that would be some type of financial or perhaps in-kind commitment to support and advance the technology internally as well. And then finally, we're looking for milestones. We want there to be clear-cut metrics of success so that we know if it's a go, no-go with regards to moving on to the next step of development. And so with that, I'm going to run through the timeline and the process involved. As you know, the RFA was rolled out on February 15th. We're going to conduct a rolling review going into sending this out for technical review to the advisory panel. So with that, internally, SCRA will be doing a compliance review just to make certain that the applications that are received are complete. And then we will send those applications to the SACT to make certain that they fit in general within the strategic criteria. I don't expect that to be an issue with this particular collaboration center, but nonetheless, we will be undertaking that pre-review as well. Then we will be sending the information out to the advisory panel on March 22nd. I guess I should step back to March 15th. That is a key date. March 15th is indeed the deadline, and it's 5 o'clock Eastern time. So the system will shut down, and you will not be able to submit applications after 5 o'clock. So please plan accordingly. And the submission portal, while it's fairly straightforward, I wouldn't want you to be in a position where you catch a technical issue and are not able to submit by 5 o'clock. So please try and submit early. And then with the pre-review complete by March 22nd, we'll send that out to the advisory panel for their review and feedback. And then ultimately that information will come back to the SACT by April 12th, so that they then have 2 weeks to review the recommendation from the advisory panel with regards to the technical criteria they establish. And then the SACT will take that information coupled with their view of compliance with the strategic criteria to make their funding decisions on April 26th. Beyond that, then we do have a deadline to get the contracts in place no later than the end of this fiscal year. So this will be moving forward at a fairly rapid clip. So I do want to speak briefly about the submission process, although this is not relevant for many people on the phone, because the submission has to come from the Technology Transfer Office. So with that, if you do not have a tech transfer office with your institution, I believe there's only 3 tech transfer offices across the state, so many of the other institutions will need assistance on this front. But if you do have a medical device that you would like evaluated, and you're part of an academic institution, please do contact Paul, and we will determine how we can proceed on that front for you. But with that, you will note that when you get to the landing page for the RFA on the SCRA website, that there's a submission portal. The submission portal is not relevant for this collaboration center because we have such a specific group that can submit applications. So with that, the technology transfer offices will submit their applications directly to SCRA. And so with that, I'm going to leave this helpful links page up while we're conversing because I want everyone to have access to these links. That first one is the landing page, so it has the RFA as well as information on how to submit your proposal, but you don't need that information because you will not be submitting your proposal through the website. So please ignore the submission portal and information about the submission portal. And then, and I even mentioned you all using the submission portal earlier, so please ignore that. That was incorrect. This group does not use the submission portal at all. But then you can also see the RFA explicitly if you follow that link. And so with that, I would like to open up the floor to questions. Paul, first I'd like to handle any if we got any under chat. Paul, did we receive any questions under the chat?
No, we did not, Christine.
Okay. Then I'd like to turn it over to the group for any questions that they may have. We did just get a question on if the slides are available. We are recording this presentation, as I mentioned at the beginning, and so we will make the recording available to everyone who has registered. And when we do that, we can also send the slide deck as well. And if any of you are interested, if you're in an industry position or are interested in engaging on the advisory panel, you can certainly also submit that through the chat if you're interested. So
hey,
with
Christine.
that, are there any questions? Yes.
Hey, it's Chelsea. How are you?
I'm well. How are you today?
Doing well. So you were mentioning that the technology transfer offices have to be the ones that submit the applications. Are you anticipating that if we have a technology that's got joint IP in between 2 institutions, are you anticipating that the technology transfer office that is leading kind of the technology would be the one applying, or does SCRA have a preference, or are you just kind of leaving that up to all of us to decide amongst ourselves?
We do not have a preference as to which institution submits. I just would encourage you to coordinate with the other institution to make certain, first of all, that you are not both submitting the same one, but also to clarify perhaps then if your organization is submitting one, then perhaps there's another joint one that the other institution could submit. But yes, I would just say that's being something that you all should work out separately.
Perfect. Okay, thank you.
And then we have some other questions that have come in on the chat, so I'll bring these up. Becky DeLegge asked, how will vendors that may complete the work be notified of the projects available? So that's actually going to be proposed by the tech transfer offices as to what vendors they would be using, and they'll put that forth in their application. We certainly encourage them to work with vendors within South Carolina, and in one particular case, I've already contacted a group saying that I could assist them with trying to find some opportunities to work within the state instead of outside of South Carolina. Then the next question from John Desjardins is, have the tech transfer offices been informed, and are they required to solicit technologies from their constituents? Yes, so John, the tech transfer offices are engaged in the SACT. They're not delegates, but they do participate in general. And they also, one tech transfer office in particular was the one who suggested that the product profiles be built out to provide as a service to the tech transfer offices. They are not required to solicit technologies from their constituents. Most likely they have more than adequate pool to pull from within their existing invention disclosures. But how they go about that is entirely at their discretion. And then Robert Adams, what is the difference between IP being assignable and assigned? So assigned means it's already been assigned to the academic institution, whereas assignable means it's putative. So the IP may not yet exist, but the potential inventors involved are affiliated with the academic institution and therefore under the intellectual property policy are obligated in the future to assign any intellectual property rights back to the academic institution. And then Thomas Gurley asked, so this program excludes private universities. Yes, that is correct. So this is exclusively for the public institutions of South Carolina. Then Thomas Gurley asked, how does industry interface with the university through the tech transfer offices? I would just recommend, I'm really not a conduit for that connectivity on, I guess, Thomas, if you could weigh in and elaborate on that question, what you meant by that? Thomas, are you on? If you could join in by phone.
I'm sorry, I was muted. Yeah, I'm a private industry with medical device experience. I'm trying to understand how I can interface with this program if it only passes through the tech transfer offices in the university. Do I need to talk to them, or do I need to talk to university people?
Hey, Thomas, this is Chelsea Exlebesky. So I'm, I think, maybe one of the only tech transfer people on the call right now. I'm not sure.
Yes, I believe so.
So I'm with MUSC's Technology Transfer Office. So for us, if you would just reach out to me afterwards and really, maybe describe to me your services, and for anyone else on this call, if you are a medical device manufacturer, you have prototyping capabilities. I mean, I know a few of you on the call right now that we are already connected with, but just reaching out to the technology transfer offices and letting us know of your services and your areas of expertise, I think would be the best way to go in case for this project, you could be a potential vendor for us, or even in the future with projects, we're kind of the gatekeepers for connecting industry partners with our technologies here on campus.
Thank you, Chelsea.
So what is your name again? I'm sorry, I didn't get it.
Chelsea Exlebesky. I can email you after. If you put your if you just message me and send me your email, we can connect afterwards.
I can connect the two of you. Let me take a note of that.
Yeah, Chelsea,
Okay,
I see Chelsea now. Thank you.
All right, that concludes the questions that have been submitted via the chat. So I'd like to open it up to those who would like to ask their questions instead. I'm sorry, was that a question? All right, well, it does not appear that there are any other outstanding questions. If anyone else would like to weigh in, certainly please by all means speak up. All right, well, with that, Paul and I will be available to answer questions as you all go forward. This is not a closed book. We're not like the DoD where they have a dark period for the month prior to the submission. So we're certainly here to help along the way with questions that arise as you work through your application as well. Adam Hoover asked, why is the funding amount less for medical device projects compared to composites and pop health? That's because there's funding that is being dedicated to building out the product profiles for each of those products as they come through. And there actually is the potential to fund 2 medical device projects because of the lower cap on them. All right, well, if there are no other questions, then I will end the call early, but please do not hesitate to reach out to Paul and I along the way. Thank you all very much. Bye-bye.